The oldest known papyrus in the world is not a prayer. It is not a royal proclamation. It is not a love poem scratched onto reed paper by some heartbroken scribe along the Nile. It is a shipping manifest. An inspector named Mera, working during the reign of the pharaoh Khufu, sat down at the end of his workday, sometime around 2560 BCE, and logged his cruise boat trips, hauling limestone blocks across the river to the construction site at Giza. He recorded how many men he supervised, about 40. He noted the loading, the sailing, the delivery, the return. He used administrative titles for his workers, the language of bureaucracy, not bondage. And his logbook, this accountant's daily journal of tonnage and tide, survived 4,500 years in a sealed cave at a Red Sea port called Wadi al-Jarf, where the French archaeologist Pierre Tallet found it in 2013. That papyrus, dry, fragmentary, magnificent in its ordinariness, dismantles one of the most persistent myths most of us carry about ancient Egypt. And it is only the beginning. Because almost everything you think you know about this civilization, the version you absorb from Hollywood and school textbooks and coffee table books with photographs of Karnak, is wrong. Not slightly off, structurally wrong. And the real story, the documented, excavated, translated, peer-reviewed story, is more extraordinary than any myth we replaced it with. Let's start with the big one. Slaves did not build the pyramids. Say it again, because it needs to settle. The people who raised the most enduring structures in human history were not enslaved. They were fed. They were organized. When they broke their bones, doctors set those bones with splints, and the bones healed. And we know this because their skeletons survived and modern researchers measured the healing. These were not the bodies of people who were worked to death. These were the bodies of people someone took care of. In 1990, a tourist's horse stumbled on a low mud brick wall just south of the Sphinx at Giza. That stumble led archaeologists Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawass to something that would take decades to fully excavate. A workers' village. Not a camp. A village. Purpose-built housing arranged in long gallery-style dormitories. Bakeries with conical bread molds still sitting in the dust where they were last used. Breweries. A copper workshop. A fish processing facility. This was infrastructure. The kind you build for people you intend to keep alive and working. And then there was the food. Analysis of the animal bones from that village tells a story no slave narrative can accommodate. These workers ate beef. In ancient Egypt, cattle were expensive. Feeding prime beef to forced labor would be like a modern corporation catering a prison with filet mignon, economically irrational unless the people eating it mattered. The workers also consumed significant quantities of sheep and goat. Their diet was comparable to what Egyptian elites ate. The people who built the Great Pyramid ate better beef than most medieval Europeans ever would. Near the village, over 600 burials have been excavated. The tombs are modest. Mud brick, no gold, no grand coffins. But they were carefully constructed. Some contained small limestone statues. Some held ceramic beer jars, placed beside the body for the journey into the afterlife. A few contained offering jars. These are not the burials of disposable labor. These are the burials of people whose culture considered them worthy of provisions for eternity. If you grew up on Cecil B. DeMille's whip-cracking overseers, on the Ten Commandments, and its image of Hebrew slaves dragging stones under the desert sun, this is the correction. The book of Exodus describes the building of the store cities of Pithom and Ramesses, not the pyramids. The pyramids predate even the earliest proposed dates for the Exodus by more than 1,000 years. No mainstream Egyptologist or biblical archaeologist connects pyramid construction to Israelite labor. The biblical account is a foundational religious text. The archaeological record shows something different. So if they were not slaves, what were they? The answer is a word that does not translate neatly into modern English: corvée. Obligatory seasonal labor owed to the state, like taxation, paid in sweat instead of coin. During the Nile's annual flood, roughly June through September, when the fields were underwater and farming was impossible, the state mobilized tens of thousands of workers for construction projects. They were compensated with food, beer, and clothing. They worked in organized crews with supervisors, titles, and attendance records. Administrative papyri from the Middle Kingdom document the names of individual workers, their ration allocations, their days absent. This is bureaucracy, not brutality. It was not voluntary. Let that be clear. You did not choose whether to go, but it was compensated, organized, and the people who performed it were treated as human beings with bodies worth healing and souls worth burying. The truth is powerful enough without making it sound like a modern construction job. Now, close your eyes for a moment and picture the Great Pyramid. You are seeing it wrong. What stands at Giza today is the skeleton, the bones of the thing, stripped bare. The pyramid, you know, that rough, stepped, sand-colored mass of exposed block, is what remained after medieval builders spent centuries prying off its skin. The original Great Pyramid was encased in fine white Tura limestone, polished to a smooth, gleaming surface so bright it hurt to look at in the midday sun. Pliny the Elder described the pyramids as blazing in the light. Remnants of that original casing survive at the base of the Great Pyramid. You can see them if you know where to look. At the top of the neighboring pyramid of Khafra, a cap of original casing still clings, smooth and pale against the rough stone below it. The casing was stripped primarily during the medieval period, accelerated after a massive earthquake in 1303 loosened the stones. Builders carted them off to construct mosques and fortifications in Cairo. The pyramid's perfection was recycled into someone else's walls. Picture it back. A geometric razor edge of white stone against endless blue sky. Not mysterious, not crumbling. Precise, designed, finished, and built by human beings whose names, in some cases, we can still read. Here is a question that might bother you, if you let it. What else did you learn in school that was wrong? Consider Cleopatra. If someone says her name, you see Elizabeth Taylor in heavy eyeliner. You see an Egyptian queen, dark-haired, coal-eyed, seducing Roman generals with her legendary beauty. Every element of that image is either wrong or misleading. Cleopatra VII was a Macedonian Greek. Her dynasty, the Ptolemies, was founded by Ptolemy the Soter, a general who served under Alexander the Great and claimed Egypt as his portion of the empire after Alexander's death. For nearly 300 years, the Ptolemies ruled Egypt from Alexandria, and they practiced aggressive endogamy, sibling marriage, specifically designed to preserve the Greek-Macedonian bloodline. Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XIII, was unambiguously Macedonian Greek. Her mother is less certain. Some scholars have proposed that Ptolemy XII's consort may not have been fully Ptolemaic, which leaves open the possibility of partial Egyptian or other ancestry. But the honest answer is that her paternal line was Greek. Her maternal line is unknown, and the Ptolemaic court she grew up in was culturally Greek in almost every respect. Greek architecture, Greek clothing, Greek language. Plutarch, writing about a century after her death, noted something that tells you everything about how Greek that dynasty remained. Cleopatra, he wrote, was remarkable among the Ptolemies for actually learning the Egyptian language. Most Ptolemaic rulers governed Egypt entirely in Greek. They never bothered to learn the language of the people they ruled. And the beauty? Plutarch was explicit. His exact words, Her beauty was not altogether incomparable, nor such as to strike those who saw her. What captivated people, he wrote, was her conversation, her intellect, her voice, which he compared to an instrument of many strings, and her ability to speak multiple languages. Surviving coin portraits, the closest we have to contemporary likenesses, show a prominent hooked nose, a strong chin, a thin-lipped mouth. These are small metal reliefs, not photographs, but they are consistent across multiple issues. Cleopatra did not seduce Rome with her face. She did it with her mind, her voice, and her command of at least 9 languages. Hollywood inverted the historical emphasis entirely, and the woman they turned into a beauty icon was not even Egyptian. If you have been following along, you have already noticed something. The myths are not random. They share a structure. They flatten. They simplify. They take a civilization that sustained itself for 3,000 years, longer than the entire span from ancient Rome to your living room, and they reduce it to a few cinematic images: slaves, beauty queens, curses, the curse. Let us be quick about it, because the evidence is quick. When Lord Carnarvon, the financial backer of Howard Carter's excavation of Tutankhamun's tomb, died on April 5, 1923, roughly 4.5 months after the tomb was opened, the press went incandescent. Arthur Conan Doyle, deep in his spiritualist phase, publicly suggested a pharaoh's curse might be responsible. Newspapers competed to list every subsequent death remotely connected to the excavation. Here is what the data actually shows. A 2002 study in the British Medical Journal examined the lifespans of the 25 Westerners present at the key stages of the tomb's opening. Their average age at death showed no statistical deviation from what actuarial tables would predict. Carnarvon himself died of an infected mosquito bite that led to blood poisoning and pneumonia. He had been in poor health since a car accident in 1901 and had gone to Egypt, partly because the dry climate helped his lungs. Howard Carter, the man who physically opened the tomb, who handled the mummy, who spent years inside the burial chamber, cataloging every object. Carter lived until 1939, 17 more years. He died at 64. The curse of the pharaohs killed fewer people than the common cold. And while we are clearing the air around Tutankhamun, he was not murdered. For decades, a bone fragment visible in early X-rays of his skull fueled lurid theories of assassination. In 2005, a comprehensive CT scan determined that fragment was a post-mortem artifact. It broke loose after death, not before. A later study, published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2010, found that Tutankhamun suffered from multiple malaria infections, a bone disease in his left foot, and a fractured left leg that occurred shortly before his death. He was a sickly teenager, and the combination killed him at roughly 19 years old. His tomb contained 130 walking sticks. He could not walk without one. Now, if I asked you what hieroglyphs are, you would probably describe them as a kind of picture writing, each symbol representing a word or an idea. Ancient emojis, essentially. This is wrong in a way that matters, because the misconception is not just inaccurate. It prevented anyone from reading hieroglyphs for over 1,000 years. The Egyptian hieroglyphic system is a complex mixed script combining 3 different types of signs operating simultaneously. Some signs are logograms. They represent whole words. Some are phonograms. They represent sounds, 1, 2, or 3 consonants. And some are determinatives, silent signs placed at the end of a word to indicate its category of meaning. A seated man sign at the end of a word tells you the word refers to a person. It is never pronounced. It is a reading aid, like an invisible label. There are roughly 24 uniliteral signs that function somewhat like an alphabet. But calling hieroglyphs An alphabet is like calling English a system of abbreviations because it contains some abbreviations. The alphabetic signs are one component of a larger, more sophisticated system. Sir Alan Gardiner's standard grammar catalogues over 700 distinct signs. Before Jean-François Champollion cracked the code in 1822 using the Rosetta Stone, European scholars were convinced hieroglyphs were purely symbolic, each sign encoding some mystical, philosophical concept. The most influential of these scholars, a 17th-century Jesuit named Athanasius Kircher, produced elaborate translations that were entirely, spectacularly wrong. His misreadings were taught for over a century. Champollion's breakthrough was recognizing what Kircher could not. The signs had sounds. The pictures talked. What the writing system tells you, if you pay attention, is something about the civilization that made it. They did not simplify. They did not reduce their language to a minimal alphabet when they could have. They maintained 700 signs because those signs carried nuance, precision, and beauty simultaneously. The Egyptian word for hieroglyphs was Medu Necher, the gods' words. They meant it literally. Let me tell you about something that will unsettle you slightly, in a way you were not expecting. At the sacred animal catacombs at Saqqara, researchers have estimated that approximately 8 million ibises were individually mummified and stacked in underground galleries. 8 million birds, each one wrapped in linen, placed in a ceramic jar, and stored in narrow tunnels that run floor to ceiling for what feels like forever in the lamplight. These were not pets. They were votive offerings. Pilgrims purchased them at temple precincts, pre-mummified, to offer to the god Thoth. An entire industry existed to supply them, breeding farms raising ibises specifically to be killed, wrapped, and sold. And here is where it turns slightly dark. CT scans of animal mummies from various sites have revealed that a notable proportion contain incomplete remains or no animal remains at all. Some are empty linen bundles sold as the real thing. Ancient Egypt had its own version of consumer fraud. Mummification itself was never the exclusive privilege of pharaohs. By the New Kingdom, even middle-class Egyptians could afford some version of the process. Herodotus described 3 tiers available for purchase. The most expensive involved full evisceration, natron drying, and elaborate wrapping. The middle tier used cedar oil injections to dissolve the organs internally. The cheapest simply cleaned and dried the body. The choice was economic. Mummification was a service industry with price tiers, like everything else. There is a papyrus in the collection of the New York Academy of Medicine that most people walk past without understanding what they are seeing. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, dating to roughly 1600 BCE but likely copied from a text several centuries older, contains 48 case studies of traumatic injuries organized systematically from head to toe. Each case includes examination procedures, diagnosis, and, this is the part that should stop you, a prognosis, sorted into 3 categories. An ailment I will treat. An ailment I will contend with. An ailment not to be treated. That is triage. Formal, clinical, honest triage. A surgeon 3,500 years ago looking at a patient with a skull fracture and fixed eyes and an immobile neck and writing down, "This person will die, and I will not pretend otherwise." The papyrus describes suturing wounds, immobilizing fractures, recognizing brain injuries from skull trauma. Alongside it, the Ebers papyrus mixes rational pharmacology. Honey as an antibacterial dressing, willow bark for pain, with magical incantations and remedies involving crocodile dung. The Egyptians did not separate medicine from magic the way we do. Both were part of a unified therapeutic worldview. But within that worldview, somebody sat down and wrote a systematic manual of evidence-based surgical practice that would not be matched in the Western tradition for millennia. One more thing, and then we are nearly done. You have probably heard that Napoleon's soldiers shot the nose off the Sphinx. It is one of those facts that feels true, that has the shape of historical irony, that people repeat at dinner parties with confident authority. A Danish naval captain named Frederick Ludwig Norden visited Egypt in 1737 and published detailed drawings of the Sphinx in 1755. In those drawings, the Sphinx is already noseless. Napoleon's Egyptian campaign began in 1798, more than 60 years later. The drawings survive. They are clear. The medieval Arab historian al-Makrizi, writing in the 15th century, attributed the damage to a Sufi zealot named Muhammad Saim al-Dar, who allegedly attacked the Sphinx in 1378 because local farmers were making offerings to it. Al-Makrizi reported that the outraged farmers subsequently killed al-Dar. The account is specific, but difficult to independently verify, and natural erosion over millennia complicates any single cause explanation. What is not complicated is this: Napoleon had nothing to do with it. If you have noticed a pattern in these corrections, you are paying attention to something important. The myths are almost always more dramatic and less human than the truth. Slaves and whips are more cinematic than organized work crews with ration logs. A cursed tomb is more thrilling than an infected mosquito bite. A seductress is more memorable than a polyglot diplomat. We chose spectacle over specificity, and in doing so, we lost something real. What we lost was the people. The workers' cemetery at Giza sits quietly in the sand, a few hundred meters from the pyramids. Small mud-brick tombs oriented east, bodies in fetal position, facing the rising sun. A beer jar placed beside a skeleton, a small limestone statue. No gold, no grandeur, but care. Unmistakable, deliberate care. Someone dug these graves. Someone placed these offerings. Someone believed these workers, these masons, these haulers, these bakers and brewers and coppersmiths deserved provisions for the afterlife. They were not slaves. They were not aliens. They were not mysterious. They were specific people who lived in a specific place and did specific, backbreaking, extraordinary work. And when they died, their colleagues buried them with the dignity their civilization afforded to anyone it considered fully human. The beer jar beside the body, that is not a mystery. That is a kindness. 3,000 years of continuous civilization, and they wrote it all down. The king lists and the grocery lists, the prayers and the shipping manifests, the surgical manuals and the love poems. We can read their language. We can name their dead. We can measure the bones they healed and count the bread molds they used and trace the boat routes they sailed. If any of this changed what you thought you knew, consider what else might be waiting in the record. We have barely started. If this is the kind of history you want, specific, sourced, and told without apology, there is more ahead. The Egyptians left us everything. The least we can do is read it correctly.